Hey there, welcome to episode 183 of Mike's Collection. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that I'm going to be talking about today is my new Transformers. And I actually have quite a lot of Transformers to tell you about. This might actually be my biggest Transformers haul ever, possibly. Because just going back through my memories, even on Christmas as a kid, it was divided between getting Transformers and He-Man and G.I. Joe. For even my best Christmas, I might have got 3 or 4 Transformers at any given time. And then nowadays, when a new wave of Transformers comes out, I will oftentimes buy the whole wave. So, for example, if there's a new wave of combiner figures, where you take 5 different Transformers and merge them together, get a larger guy, I'll buy, all 5 or 6 of those figures all in one fell swoop. And that's usually an entire wave of figures. But I have 10 new Transformers to show you that I all got just the other day. And this whole batch of figures that I'm going to show you, I ordered them all directly from Hasbro, from their Hasbro Pulse website, which is not something I do very often. There have been a couple of exclusives that I've ordered through Hasbro, like some of their G.I. Joe figures and such. But usually I don't really think to buy from Hasbro. But in this particular instance, I bought a whole bunch of shit from Hasbro. So let's go through it. And the reason why I did go to Hasbro is if you watch my videos, if you're familiar with this, every time I talk about Transformers, I kind of reiterate the fact that I'm into Generation 1 Transformers, which would be the Transformers of the 80s. Because I'm a guy in my 40s. I was there. I was the right age. I was like 5 years old when the Transformers first came out. So Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, Megatron, Soundwave, Starscream, those are my guys. When they kind of evolved the brand into Beast Wars was the next thing, and then Prime and the Unicron trilogy, or some of these more animated, when I say animated, kind of more like anime, like Japanese style cartoons. I wasn't really into any of that stuff. Even with the new live action Michael Bay movies, I buy very few of those figures. I hate the movies. There's a couple, occasionally they make a decent figure, but for the most part, all my Transformers collecting is focused around G1. Anyway, a little while ago, actually I'm still in the process of doing it. I mentioned this in an earlier video, but one of my favorite YouTube channels was a channel called Nerd Out. And these guys don't make videos anymore. It's been more than a year since they've put out a video. But it used to be these 2 guys that would sit around and review toys and talk about stuff. So I decided I was going to go back and rewatch all of the episodes of Nerd Out back to back to back. And I've kind of been binge watching this stuff, watching these toy reviews from several years ago. And they were really excited when they got a toy of Optimus Primal. So this is the gorilla version of Optimus Prime from the Beast Wars cartoon of the 90s that I wanted nothing to do with. But back to these videos from a couple of years ago, they got the masterpiece version of Optimus Primal, which transforms from this robot mode into a gorilla mode, and they were absolutely loving it. And then a couple episodes later, they got the repaint version, which they liked even better, and they were going on and on about how great it was. And I don't know, there was something about watching these videos and seeing how excited the guys on Nerd Out were about this Optimus Primal figure. It got me thinking that I wouldn't have gone out of my way to go buy an Optimus Primal for myself. But at my local Walmart, just down the street from me, every time I go there, I check the toy department. There hasn't been anything very exciting there for a while. But I know they do have this new version of Optimus Primal hanging on the pegs at my local Walmart right now. And this is part of the Transformers R.E.D series, which stands for Robot Enhanced Design. And this series of Transformers focuses on the robot mode, and they do not transform. So Optimus Primal in the cartoon and all other versions of this character transform from this guy into a gorilla. This guy looks like he should because he's got all these hairy gorilla parts all over him, but he doesn't. Anyway, so watching those videos, I thought, you know what? I'm going to go out to my Walmart and I'm going to pick this guy up. And I did. And to my surprise, I actually really dig it. It doesn't take the place of G1 Transformers at all, but I kind of like the fact that I can display this guy next to my Optimus Prime and knowing that they're supposed to be different characters. It's just kind of nice to add a new character to my collection because I feel like I'm buying the same characters over and over again a lot of the time. So yeah, after I got this guy, it got me thinking that, you know what, maybe I should buy the other Red Series Beast Wars figure that was out a little while ago, Cheetor. But I haven't seen Cheetor around for months. So then I was like, well, where can I find him? Because I think these are Walmart exclusive figures. I buy a lot of my toys online at places like Big Bad Toy Store, but Big Bad Toy Store does not stock any of the Red series of Transformers. So I was like, yeah, where can I find Cheetor? And I thought, you know what? Maybe I'll try Hasbro Pulse. And sure enough, they did have Cheetor there. So I put him in my cart, and then I thought, well, if I'm buying one thing from Hasbro Pulse, I might as well make it worth my while because I'm going to pay $30 for this figure, and it's going to cost $30 just to ship it. But if I buy 2 or 3 or 4 figures, usually the shipping is about the same cost for 4 figures as it is for 1. Anyway, I ended up buying 10 figures, and they shipped them through FedEx. They arrived quite quickly. I just ordered these things about 2 weeks ago, and they arrived. So yeah, I'm going to show you all those 10 figures I got from Hasbro Pulse. Now, first up, I'll show you the Red Series figures that I got. Now, for some strange reason, so after I put these 10 items in my cart, Hasbro Pulse, they came up with a shipping amount, and it was about $30, which I was fine with. And then a couple of days later, I got a shipping notice, and they said, some of your figures have shipped. And they put the 3 Red Series figures I ordered in a box by themselves and shipped those to me, which arrived to me last Friday. And then the other figures, the other 7 figures, they came in a box today, being Monday is when I'm shooting this. So they didn't charge me more for the shipping. I don't know why they decided to break this up into 2 boxes. And both of the boxes they sent me were huge, oversized boxes, way bigger than they needed to be for what was inside of them. But anyway, I don't understand their logic. They could have just waited a day and packaged it all together and sent it to me, but that's neither here nor there. But anyway, the thing is, since I got these Red Series, these 3 figures on Friday, I already opened them up. So I don't have them in the box here for you. But this here is Cheetor. So this is the Beast Wars character that transforms from a robot into a cheetah. And, as far as the box goes, I'll put a little cutaway in here. But the Red Series boxes, they're nice looking boxes. They're red, which makes sense. And it's got a nice big window on it, so you can see the figure, and another little window down the side, so you can see all the accessories, and there's some nice artwork on the front and everything. So that's all well and good. But I'm not somebody that keeps my packaging generally, so that stuff's already in the garbage, in the recycling, I should say. But yeah, this guy's cool. And I'm surprised because I'm familiar with him. My little brother used to watch Beast Wars, so I remember when it was on. I'd see this guy on TV, and I've seen this figure in stores. Just a couple of months ago, this guy was around. And a couple months before that, there was actually a transforming version of this guy that came out as part of the, Kingdom line. And I could have bought that guy too, but I looked at him and it didn't even register with me. I'm like, who cares about this thing? But here I am just a couple of months later after not caring about this thing at all. And I find myself thinking he's pretty cool. I still would not consider myself a Beast Wars guy. I'm not in any rush to buy any more Beast Wars characters. But when the next time I see a new Beast Wars character, I'll definitely consider it rather than just completely disregard it. I don't like this guy as much as Optimus Primal. But, he's got some neat designs with the, the colors are kind of interesting. He doesn't look like anybody else on my shelf. He's got this kind of bluish purple metallic-y paint job with the metallic gold. And then he's got the leopard prints all over him. It's pretty interesting design. The head sculpt is pretty unique as well. It's got a lot of personality in the face. I'm pretty sure this is a good guy. This is an Autobot or a Maximal. That was what the Autobots were called in the Beast Wars line. But he kind of looks like a bad guy. Just the look on his face. He looks kind of angry. I'm not going to go over all the articulation and stuff. It's pretty standard if you've seen any of these Red Series. They're action figures. They're not Transformers. So their articulation is better than what you'd find in a usual Transformer. They've got ankles. They've got swivel at the mid-leg. Their knees. They've got a nice double-jointed knee. All that stuff. So yeah, I'm not going to go over all that. They're really nice and posable. The look of this guy, it's a little weird how he's got these big chunks of animal hanging off of him. He's got the head of the what is this guy called? A cheetah. That's what I'm looking for. Cheetor transforms into a cheetah. So he's got the head of the cheetah on the front of him there. And that's okay. But the legs, he's got these big crossed legs on his back, which look a little silly, I find. And I understand that that would be, you couldn't really do anything about that if you were the toy designers, if this thing had to transform into a cheetah. But since this figure doesn't have to transform into a cheetah, I would think that would maybe give them an opportunity to maybe get rid of those so they don't look so awkward hanging off of his back. But I understand that that's how it looked in the animation. That's how the old toy looked. So this is true to the character. So I suppose it's good that they stuck with it. It's just kind of funny because when I look at Primal, he doesn't have a gorilla head hanging off him anywhere. He doesn't have any obvious gorilla arms and legs because he obviously uses the same arm and legs as the gorilla. But this guy here, it's definitely, there's a lot more animal kibble hanging off of him. But yeah, not a bad figure. Now the other Red Series guys I bought, I've seen this one here around stores, and I could have bought this at my local Walmart a few times. Although I haven't seen it the last 2 or 3 trips I've made, so maybe it's good I did buy it from Hasbro Pulse because maybe I missed my chance locally. But this here is Megatron, and I forget what they call this guy, but let's just call him mid-transformation or mid-format Megatron. So this here, you'll notice he is all purple, which is not your typical color for Megatron. And then about halfway through, kind of across his chest, you see this little blue paint line, and then he's got this white grid painted across him. And so what this is supposed to represent is in the original Transformers animated movie from 1986. Megatron is near death. He's kind of betrayed by his fellow Decepticons and they abandon him, his dying body floating in space. And then the evil planet Unicron finds him and decides to make him his minion, his disciple, whatever. And he reformats Megatron and makes him even more powerful into Galvatron. And so when that happened, this kind of grid-like thing went over Megatron and transformed him into the new character. So it's kind of very specific. It's not the kind of thing you necessarily need to spend $30 on for a thing that happened once for about 5 seconds. Because I already have a Megatron toy and I already have a Galvatron toy. Do I really need this toy that shows him turning from one thing to the other? And apparently the answer is yes. Yes, I do. Because, for one, this is a great figure. The Megatron figure I bought from the Red Series maybe a year and a half ago, I got this guy. I absolutely love it. I think it looks great. It looks like it just stepped right out of the cartoon. And I was really pleased with this. So I knew it was a pretty solid base figure already. And, it's translucent purple. I think I'd actually probably like it better if it was all translucent purple and didn't have this grid effect on it. But I don't mind the grid effect. But because that is so specific to a moment in time, I think I'd rather just have a purple translucent Megatron. That would be kind of a neater thing to have than a mid-transformation. But otherwise, he's the same. The articulation, the sculpting, same figure. It was a solid figure then. It's still a solid figure now. And yeah, very cool. And then the other Red Series guy I got, it's another repaint. So from Series 1, Red Series, here's the Optimus Prime. So it was a pretty solid figure. Not perfect. My biggest problem with this guy is that he was a little too small. When Wave 1 came out, I was expecting him to be a little bit bigger. They're actually smaller than other 6-inch action figure lines I collect. He's smaller than G.I. Joe's and he's smaller than Star Wars figures. And that just seems a little off to me. I would think Transformers should have been a little bit bigger. And then even amongst their own universe, because chances are I'm not going to display him next to a Star Wars or a G.I. Joe character, so it's okay if that scales off. But even amongst this line, they put out a Bumblebee figure, and the Bumblebee is just as tall as Optimus, and that just doesn't look great to me. So I wish this Optimus Prime was a little bit bigger. But all that aside, just on its own, as a standalone piece, I think it's pretty good. It's got good sculpting, good articulation, all that sort of stuff. So anyway, they repainted this figure into what they call Ultra Magnus. And, yeah, it's just a white Optimus Prime. And I knew this was coming out, and if I saw it at my local Walmart, I might have picked it up. but I haven't had that opportunity yet. I haven't seen it yet because this figure here is pretty new. So I think probably Hasbro Pulse is maybe where you're going to find it right now. But yeah, I was on the fence with this guy because if you're not aware who Ultra Magnus is and what his deal is in the earliest series of Transformers, like, you know, going back to the original 80s line. So, you know, Optimus Prime, big red truck, he was the leader of the Autobots. And then that movie came out in 1986 where, spoiler alert, they killed Optimus Prime along with a whole bunch of the other original Autobots, which traumatized children all over the place. But Hasbro didn't have I guess they didn't know their characters were as beloved as they were. And they just saw the movie as an opportunity to clear the slate of all these old characters of toys they already sold and to introduce new characters so they could sell kids new toys. They didn't know kids were so attached to the actual characters. So anyway, Optimus Prime died. They replaced him with a young, brash Autobot named Hot Rod, who took over the matrix of leadership, and he became Rodimus Prime. So he was the new hero. But one of the other characters that was introduced in that movie, which was kind of almost like a red herring, because they introduced this very, by the book, a big guy that turned into a truck, and he seemed like he was, very noble, and he was, he seemed very suited for leadership. He was Ultra Magnus, and then you had the young, brash Hot Rod. So it almost seemed like, okay, well, Optimus Prime is dead. Surely Ultra Magnus is going to become the new leader of the Autobots. But surprise, that's not what happened. Hot Rod, grew into his own, and he became Rodimus Prime, and he took over the matrix of leadership. So Ultra Magnus was just kind of almost like just there to throw a little swerve at you. Anyway, so I don't have the original Ultra Magnus toy, but I do have this really cool Ultra Magnus toy from the Siege line that came out a couple of years ago. So you can see how big and bulky and armored he is, and how very little he looks like Optimus Prime. He looks quite a bit different. But dating back to that very original toy of him that came out in like 1986, and pretty much every version of him since, right up to this current version, Ultra Magnus is made up of a suit of armor, and I haven't done this in years, so I don't know if I'll be able to do it properly. But underneath all this armor is a white Optimus Prime. I don't know, maybe I should pause the video while I do this, because otherwise I'm probably gonna... I don't want to break this thing. Let's see, okay, here we go. Flip that, so you flip that up, and that comes off. And you see there's this white guy inside here, and where's his head? I promise it's in here somewhere. Oh, there's another piece that just came off. These pieces on the arms come off like so. Okay, I'm not going to bother doing this whole transformation, but you get the idea. So you see, you open up the armor, and you see he's got the arms there. If you inside his legs, you see these legs come off, and he's just got the smaller legs there. So there's just a white Optimus Prime inside of Ultra Magnus. And, that was always kind of weird. It kind of blew your mind as a kid, because you got the Ultra Magnus toy, and you realized it was just a white Optimus Prime toy, like the Optimus Prime you already had in your collection, except with all these snap-on bits. And it made you think, like, well, is Ultra Magnus, is he just a armor that Optimus Prime wears? Is he Optimus Prime's brother? Like, what's the deal? But they never addressed it in either the cartoons or the comic books about why there's this white Optimus Prime inside of Ultra Magnus. They did eventually address it in the comics published like 20 years later, published by IDW. But it wasn't a white Optimus Prime. They leaned into the idea that Ultra Magnus was this big, buff, noble leader, but then he took all the armor off, and he was a little teeny guy inside of the armor named Minimus Ambus, who just kind of used the Ultra Magnus armor to, earn more respect and instill fear in his enemies, but really he was a little guy. So they leaned into the idea that Ultra Magnus is really just a suit of armor. Anyway, all that backstory aside, so the fact that Hasbro was putting out this figure and calling it Ultra Magnus, and it doesn't have any of the snap-on pieces that we associate with Ultra Magnus, it seems kind of, I don't know, like kind of a bold move, maybe kind of a lazy move, because most people don't want this and think, this is an Ultra Magnus, it needs to have the armor to be Ultra Magnus. But the thing is, I always liked the look of the white Optimus Prime, and every time I get an Ultra Magnus that has a white Optimus Prime inside, I display it as Ultra Magnus with all the armor on it. So you never see these little white Optimus Primes. They're always hidden away inside of the Ultra Magnus armor. So for the Red Series, they released this white Optimus Prime, which is just a straight repaint of the red Optimus Prime that they released earlier. And yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I kind of like having this guy on my shelf. I hope that in the Red Series they do release another I hope they release another version of Ultra Magnus with the armor, and maybe that figure would be larger, and maybe, you know, they'd have to charge a higher price point, because these guys are like $30. Maybe that'll be 40, 45. So that'd be cool to see. But I do like the fact that they released this standalone white Ultra Magnus. I think that's pretty cool. Now you see here, he's got the same gun as Optimus Prime. But I also have him, he's got a kind of this translucent blue energy axe for a weapon instead of one of his hands. That was an option. He does have another white hand you could display with him. Actually, I think he had a few different hands. And that reminds me, all of these Red Series figures come with quite a few accessories. Usually a couple of swappable hands, a couple of different weapons. In the cutaway, I'll have to show you all the different weapons that these guys came with and everything. But yeah, pretty cool. I'm pleased with these guys. I think he looks pretty good. Okay, so those were the 3 Red Series figures that I got on Friday. Now, all the rest of the stuff is the stuff that just arrived today for Monday. So, I guess I'll show you this figure. I know I told you I just ordered 10 Transformers. I did actually order 1 Star Wars figure in the same set. So I ordered the Black Series Bib Fortuna. But I have a couple other Star Wars figures that I've got kind of sitting in a pile over there that I'm waiting to show you in another video. So we'll talk about Bib Fortuna another time. But anyway, so the other Transformers I got. Now this is kind of interesting, because usually when I do buy, say, a whole bunch of figures all at once, like, it probably happens most commonly with Marvel Legends, because, you know, they do the Build-A-Figure series. So when a new set of Marvel Legends comes out, sometimes I buy all 6 figures all in one fell swoop, so I can get the Build-A-Figure parts to build the extra bonus figure. So whenever I do buy, you know, a group of action figures, you know, they all have nice, linear, consistent packaging. Now here, for the different types of Transformers I got, these are all current Transformers, like all released this year. Some of them released literally just within the last month or two. And there's a lot of different types of boxes here. Like, it looks very weird when I opened the box up and I saw all these different types of packaging. So I have yet to get any Legacy figures. So for the last couple years, we had the Transformers War for Cybertron series, and that was kind of the overarching story. And the trilogy was split into 3 parts. So in 2019, I think it was, that we had War for Cybertron Siege, and then we had War for Cybertron Earthrise, and then War for Cybertron Kingdom in 2020 and 2021. And now the line for 2022 is called Legacy. And it's got a new brand of packaging. It's no longer War for Cybertron. And I haven't received any of those figures yet. I pre-ordered Blaster from Big Bad Toy Store, and he's in the mail right now. I'm waiting for that package to arrive. And actually, with these figures here, I had them all on pre-order from Big Bad Toy Store as well, but Big Bad Toy Store hasn't stocked them yet. So since I was ordering from Hasbro and they had them in stock right then and there, I ordered them from Hasbro, canceled my Big Bad Toy Store orders. So here we go. So this is the new Legacy packaging. So it's similar, like, as far as the shape and everything. Like, it's not quite a box. Like, it's got a little bit of an angle on it and everything. And it's got some nice character artwork on the side, you know, and then it's got kind of a montage with some of the other characters on the other side. So it's very similar to what we saw for the War for Cybertron packaging, but it feels a little more, I don't know, a little brighter, a little more neon, like all these purples and greens. Like, it looks kind of like a disco box or something. I don't know how to really describe it. The other real major change for this is the open packaging. Hasbro was trying to get away from plastic in their packaging. So this figure here, it's open. Normally on Transformer figures, there'd be a plastic shield there, and there would be a plastic insert inside that the figure rests on. But if you see inside there, that's all cardboard inside, and he's just in there with twist ties. And yeah, there's no front there, which I don't have a problem with the no plastic. I think this figure still looks pretty good, and if you were an in-box collector, you could still display this, and I don't think that would be as big a problem. But I know I have heard some grumbling from people online that like to collect toys and keep them in the boxes because, like with Star Wars Black Series and such, you know, if you get rid of that plastic, either the figure is going to be all open and people will be able to just, you know, steal them, which is happening, you know, or they're going to put them in fully enclosed boxes, which is what they've shown they're going to do for Marvel Legends. And that sucks too, because if you're an in-box collector and you can't see the physical toy, just a picture of the toy or, you know, on the front, then almost what's the point of buying it? You could just have the empty box. So, yeah, that sucks for in-box collectors, but I don't really care. Anyway, so this here is Skidz, and this is a character, he's one of the, basically one of the original Autobots. Came out in 1984, the first year, and this guy transforms into, I don't know, a truck or an SUV, I guess. I don't know. The original Transformers were all based on real-world vehicles. I'm not a car guy, so I couldn't identify any of the vehicles for you. I don't know if they transform into real-world vehicles necessarily. Like, I think he was a Honda originally. I don't think this would translate to any actual Honda, new or otherwise, but it's kind of a close approximation to the vehicle that Skids used to turn into. And this is a cool figure. That it looks cool. I will say that it looks a little cheap. I don't know. There's something about the open packaging that has me a little worried, because it reminds me of usually the all ages Transformers are sold in open packaging like this. Like if you've gone into a toy store aisle, you know, anytime in the last couple of years, you see all the War for Cybertron figures, and they're all in the nice boxes with the plastic. And then they have these other more kid-friendly toys that aren't as complicated. They're a little more cartoony looking, and they're usually in, I think, like yellow boxes, and they're open so the kids can touch and feel them. And so just seeing this with the open box, I kind of feel like it looks like a step down from the War for Cybertron figures, but that might just be my initial impressions. Once I get these guys open, I'm hoping that it's going to feel like just a continuation of the War for Cybertron, as far as like scale and articulation and quality and all that sort of stuff. But I do like how, at a glance, it really looks like this Skids is going to be faithful to the original 1984 Skids. I do have a nice Skids figure in my collection. It's from a couple of years ago. I think it was the Classics line or some variation of that. You know, so around 2015 or something, I'm going to say. Anyway, it's a cool looking figure, but it doesn't really look like the classic Skids. It's based more on his comic book appearance. So he's a lighter blue and everything. I'll do a side by side here so you can see them. But and I don't feel the need to replace all my Transformers. Like, I'm hoping when Legacy comes out, they're going to make a new Optimus Prime and a new Bumblebee, and I'm not going to buy those ones because I'm content with the ones I already have in my shelf. But when it comes to Skids, this was a character that I don't really feel that I have a true G1 representation in my collection. So that's why I decided to get a new version of Skids. And yeah, so I think he looks pretty cool. Now, along those same lines, I've got Dragstrip. So this is a Decepticon race car. Now this guy, he is one of the Stunticons. I think he originally came out in 1986, I'm going to guess. So there were 4 race cars and a big rig, and the 4 race cars all snapped into the big rig and they became Menasor. He was one of the combiners. So whenever they do a combiner like that, they pretty much always put out all the figures in one wave. It's kind of odd that they're putting out Dragstrip all by himself, and then I think the plan is to release another Stunticon in the next wave and another Stunticon in the next wave. So it's going to take you like a full year or so to build Menasor, which is an odd choice. I don't hate it, but it's just different. So anyway, the Stunticons are not one of my favorite Transformers, partly because when we were kids, my brother Doug had all of the Stunticons, so he owned Menasor, so I don't have that same attachment to them as I would, say, the Constructicons or the Protectobots that I had. And besides that, I already have versions of the Stunticons in my collection that came out in the Combiner Wars collection a couple of years ago. So normally I would say, since he's not one of my favorite characters, since I already have a fairly decent version of him already in my collection just from a few years ago, I normally wouldn't have bothered to upgrade him. However, when it comes to some of these Combiner figures, I actually display them in my collection as Combiners. Which is tough sometimes, because sometimes I really like the individual characters and not just the big cool combined robot. So with him, I have him displayed in my collection, but he's just a limb. He's just like a leg over there on Menasor. And so you look at my collection and you don't really see Dragstrip represented. So that's why I decided to buy a new version of him, because I was like, you know what? Now I can have Menasor in my collection, and I can also have the individual Stunticons displayed around him, and I don't have to feel guilty about not having, these guys separated. So, and I think this looks like a better version of Dragstrip. I'll do a side-by-side comparison with the Combiner Wars version, but I think this one does look superior, and it's definitely miles ahead of the old vintage one, which was kind of short and stumpy. But yeah, so there you go. That's Dragstrip. And another one I got. This is another character, so I already have him in my collection. The version I have is just from a few years ago, so that would kind of teeter on the, do I really need to replace this guy? And this is one of those instances where I have to say yes, because this is Kickback, and he is one of the Insecticons. He transforms into a grasshopper. And when it comes to Transformers, obviously scale is kind of a weird thing, because you've got a guy that transforms into a truck, a guy that transforms into a bug, into a dinosaur, into an aircraft carrier, into a city, and yet these guys all hang out with each other. But when you think of how big a guy that transforms into a city would have to be compared to a guy that transforms into a truck for them to talk to each other, it's, like, sure, Metroplex was bigger than Optimus Prime, but not as big as he should have been. And Broadside, who was an aircraft carrier, he was almost the same size as Optimus Prime. It didn't really make sense. So for me, I don't really care about that sort of scale. What matters to me is that it matches up with what the cartoons and maybe what the vintage toy line looked like. So for example, I always think Optimus Prime and Megatron should be about the same size, even though Optimus Prime transforms into a truck and Megatron turns into a handgun. But in the cartoons, those guys were always portrayed as kind of equals, so I feel they always need to be the same scale. Now, when it came to the Insecticons, and of which there were 3 main Insecticons, Shrapnel, Bombshell, and Kickback, when these guys were in robot mode, they were always shown to be, like, to scale with all the Transformers that turned into cars. They were maybe a little bit shorter, but not much. So, this guy could stand there and talk to Starscream, and, it wasn't who transforms into a jet, and it wasn't like he was staring up at a giant or something. These guys were pretty much the same height. So I always felt that I wanted new Insecticons that were, about the same size as the guys I have that turn into trucks. And so when you see Kickback here next to Skidz, they're the same size. And that's how big I think the Insecticons need to be. And the Insecticons that they put out a couple of years ago were about half of that size. So even though they were decent figures, they just looked way too small. Also, I really love this kind of reflective plastic they used on the chest. It's a little more, it looks more like the vintage Insecticons of the 80s. It looks better than the ones that I have over there from a couple of years ago. So anyway, I love the Insecticons. I really hope that we get the other 2 soon. So yeah, I'm excited about that guy. So anyway, there you go. So you've seen my new Legacy. That is all... I forget what size. All the different size Transformers all have different names, like Deluxe class, Legends class, whatever. I think that's the Deluxe size. Anyway, so those are all 3 figures from the Deluxe. There is another one, RC, but I didn't get her. Anyway, so the other Transformers I have here. So this one's kind of interesting. So this is Silver Streak. This is a brand new figure. And you see his box. You can tell it's brand new because it also has the open window. And I gotta be honest, this looks kind of cheap to me too, especially when I see this yellow box, because I think it's really reminiscent of the kind of the childish, the children-oriented Transformers that I see on shelves. But I don't know what this is all about, the Buzzworthy Bumblebee. Like, it's still part of the Legacy line, and the figure is actually on par with the other figures. It's not like dumbed down or simplified. This is actually a repaint of a figure that we got in the War for Cybertron line. So yeah, I really don't know what the deal is with this Buzzworthy Bumblebee. It's not like it's crossing over with the Bumblebee movie or anything like that. I really don't get it, but whatever. And as far as I know, this is a Target exclusive. So we don't have Targets in Canada. So when I was on the Hasbro website, I saw this guy and I was like, I didn't even know that was coming out. And so I read the little description and it said Target exclusive. So I'm like, I better grab this guy because store exclusives, they make them available on Hasbro's website, but usually in very limited numbers. So I was worried if I slept on this guy for any amount of time, it might have been sold out. And then it would be a real pain in the ass for me to try to get one from Target. So there we go. Now this guy here, he's another one of the original Autobots back from 1984. And I have been building a modern Transformers collection since about 2005. So I wanted to get modern versions of all the original Transformers. And I've come pretty far. I've done pretty well. And during the War for Cybertron line, I finally got an upgraded version of Silverstreak, which I had never had before. I never owned the vintage Silverstreak. I never had any versions of him in between. So it took me, a good 30-something years to get a nice version of Silverstreak. And I have that in my collection, and it's this exact same figure, which I'll do a cutaway, and you'll see a side-by-side. But why I wanted to get this guy is, so the original Transformer toys, when they were like imported to North America from Hasbro, and they became Transformers, they came from a bunch of different toy lines. A lot of the kind of mid-range size, they came from a toy line called Diaclone. And in Japan, Diaclone figures, they didn't have the mythology and the names and all that stuff that the Transformers have. Hasbro created all that stuff. But in Japan, Silverstreak, the Diaclone version, before he had the name Silverstreak, was colored like this. He was blue with a silver hood. I know you can't really see him right here, but once I open him up, you'll see that he's primarily all blue and that he's got a silver hood. Oddly enough, when they brought him to America, they painted him silver and red, and they called him, now I'm getting confused, but I think they called him Bluestreak when they brought him over, and even though he was silver, and then they later created Silverstreak being colored in blue, whatever the case might be. Anyway, in my mind, I can see Bluestreak and Silverstreak as two different characters with two different color schemes, and that is why I wanted to add this guy to my collection, so I can display those two guys together, and in my mind, they're different guys. Next up. So this is from the Shattered Glass line of Transformers. So if you're not familiar with Shattered Glass, don't worry. I'm actually not that familiar with Shattered Glass. I'm familiar with the concept. Basically what it is, it's like a bizarro world from the comic books where all the good guys are bad guys and the bad guys are good guys. So they've released Shattered Glass versions of Megatron, of Optimus Prime, of other characters. So they're usually painted, the good guys are painted in darker colors and the bad guys are painted in lighter colors. It's not something I was really that interested in because I never read any of the Shattered Glass comic books that they put out to kind of promote this. But I did buy the white and red heroically colored Starscream at the start of this year because I thought that looked really cool. And then with this character here, so this is Goldbug. So this is Shattered Glass Goldbug, and he's painted black with a little bit of gold and a blue head. So the reason why I decided to pull the trigger on this is Goldbug is Bumblebee. So if you don't know your Transformer lore, the original Bumblebee came out in 1984, and he was this little teeny yellow Volkswagen Beetle, and he was in the comic books and the cartoons. And then, and I think it was 1987, they released a new version of him, and his name had changed to Goldbug. He still transformed into a yellow Volkswagen, except I think it went from yellow to gold. But he had a new face, so instead of the little nose and mouth and the kind of cute little face everybody's used to, he had a face like this, this was supposed to be the more mature Bumblebee. He was almost portrayed like a child in the first two seasons of the cartoon and the comic books, but when he turned into Goldbug, he was a little more grown up and a little more hardcore. in the comic book specifically, the excuse they came up with to turn Bumblebee into Goldbug was that they did a crossover comic book with the G.I. Joe and Transformers, and the G.I. Joe team didn't know that the Transformers existed in their universe because, you know, they were robots in disguise. But then Bumblebee had to transform from a car mode to a robot. I think he was trying to save a kid or something, but he startled the G.I. Joe team, and they thought he was like some sort of super weapon from Cobra, and they blew him to pieces. It was kind of a traumatic moment in comic books. Even the cover of issue 1 shows G.I. Joe just like obliterating Bumblebee. So yeah, it was kind of shocking that they did that. But and maybe, you know, you thought Bumblebee was dead for a short time, but then they rebuilt him as Goldbug. Anyway, I have a Bumblebee in my collection that I'm satisfied with, but I don't have a Goldbug. They don't really make Goldbug figures. I don't know when the last time they did. I don't think they have in the modern era. So when I saw this shattered glass Goldbug, I thought, well, that's pretty cool, but I would rather have an authentic G1 style Goldbug that's, you know, fully gold. But I haven't seen them announce that yet. I don't know if they're putting it out. It seems kind of crazy that they haven't. But I do like the look of this guy. I think he looks pretty cool in the black and the blue. So I thought, you know what, I better grab this guy before he's gone, just in case they don't put out an all-gold version of him. I'll be disappointed that I totally missed out on Goldbug. So even though this isn't necessarily the ideal version, I think it looks cool, and I wanted a Goldbug in my collection. Alright, 2 more. Excuse me. This here is Perceptor. So again, you see this is a totally different style box again. That's because this is the Studio Series of figures. So they've been doing Studio Series for a couple of years now, and Studio Series comes from the term that these are based on the movies. So it started out, this line was mostly figures of the Michael Bay characters, because, you know, those are the Transformers movies that most people think of when you think Transformers the movie. But there was that original movie just called Transformers the movie that came out in 1986. The one I mentioned earlier that killed Optimus Prime and introduced Ultra Magnus. And so the Studio Series has evolved to include figures from that animated movie. And I haven't got many of them. I picked up the Sharkticon a little while ago, which I reviewed, again, a couple of months ago, and I wasn't very impressed with it, to be honest with you. I'm hoping this Perceptor is better than the Sharkticon. I just found the Sharkticon felt really kind of cheap. And his parts didn't stick together very well. Like, I feel a Transformer, once you transform it from one mode to the other, the pieces should kind of click in place. You know, so when you move his arm, his panels aren't coming off and he's all wonky. I found the Sharkticon was really wonky. So I'm hoping he's not. But I don't have a good Perceptor in my collection. I had Perceptor when I was a kid. He transforms into a microscope, which is not the most exciting of modes. But yeah, I thought he was great as a kid. He's like the Autobot scientist, so it makes sense, I guess, that he transforms into a microscope. But I got rid of all my vintage Transformers, so I don't have the one I had when I was a kid. And then the version that I got, I think around 2008 or 9 or so, when I was rebuilding my modern Transformers collection, they changed Perceptor so that he transforms into like a tank. His robot mode still looks similar, but instead of this like microscope lens on his shoulder, it's a tank cannon. And so they kept kind of the basic look of him, but it's never quite sat right with me. I kind of wanted a Perceptor that actually transformed into a microscope. And this figure here looks like it's going to be pretty true to the original look from the cartoon. So I'm happy to add this guy to my collection as well. And the last one, I probably shouldn't have saved this for last because it's kind of the most boring, to be honest with you. In past videos, I've talked about the Transformers Selects line. You have to excuse me, I've got a bit of a cough. I had COVID a couple weeks ago, and that cough is hanging around. I get a bit of a scratch there when I talk too long. Anyway. So yeah, Transformers Selects. This is like a retailer exclusive line, and they put them out in these boring cardboard boxes. So that's what I've got here. So again, if you saw this in stores, there'd be no way for you to see the toy that you're getting inside. You kind of just have to know. So this here is a Legacy figure. I've gotten a few of them. I think they put some really cool figures in this Legacy line. They're often kind of obscure repaints of characters that maybe the general public don't know. But if you're a Transformers fan, you usually do. Sometimes it's a repaint of an old Diaclone version of one of the Transformers. It might be something like from an alternate universe, like a shattered glass or something, say. Anyway, this one here, this is Ironhide, the Transformers that turns into a minivan. And he's normally red. But this one here, if you open it up, and he is black with some red, like, trim on him or whatever. So, this is another version, sort of similar to Silverstreak there, or Bluestreak, that this is based on the original Diaclone. So before Ironhide was ever a Transformer, he was a black minivan that existed in Japan, and then Hasbro said, we're going to bring that toy over to North America, we're going to paint it red, give him a name, Ironhide, give him a background, he's going to be part of a line called Transformers. And that's all well and good, but this black, nameless thing still existed in Japan, and so this is Hasbro's, I don't know if it's the first time they've ever adapted the Diaclone colors Ironhide, but it's the first one I've seen anyway. Now, they gave him a pretty boring name. He's just called the DK2 Guard. I don't really even know what that's supposed to mean. But anyway, it looks pretty cool. And this is the first time I've gotten this mold. Because when the Siege figures first came out, that's when I got Ironhide, and I also got Ratchet, who is the ambulance, who is a repaint of Ironhide. And both of them are in their Cybertronian modes. So the robot mode looks similar to this, but they transform into weird kind of space vans. And then they re-released those two characters again as part of the Earthrise line, because the whole premise of this War for Cybertron was the first wave, Siege, is when these characters existed on their native planet of Cybertron, so they wouldn't have Earth modes yet because they didn't know what Earth vehicles looked like. Then when they got to Earth in the second chapter, they took on their Earth modes. So they re-released Ironhide and Ratchet. They looked similar in robot mode, but their alt modes were more van-like, more true to their true G1 modes. But I didn't rebuy them because, like I said, I don't like to rebuy every time they redo these characters. I was still content with my Siege versions, but I did like the look of the Earthrise versions. So it's kind of cool to get this guy because it gives me an excuse to get the Earthrise Ironhide, even though it's technically not Ironhide, I guess. So that's all my new Transformers. So now I'm going to open these guys up. I'm going to shoot some, B footage to split the screen. But if I realize that there's something maybe either good or bad about the figure that I didn't realize, that I might add some inserts throughout here to show you something specific. So I just finished shooting all of my B-roll, so you could see the cutaways of all the figures outside of the packaging, and honestly that took me way longer than I anticipated, so I'm a day later than I wanted to be posting this video, and I really don't want to shoot anything more. I really just want to kind of put a pin in this one, but I did kind of title this video Transformers Review, and I realized I didn't really review anything because when I did all my talking, most of these toys were still in their boxes. So I just kind of wanted to end this with a quick overview of everything and say that I like all of these figures. This is my first time handling any of the legacy Transformers, and I was kind of curious if the quality would go down from the War for Cybertron stuff. And I don't think it has. I really like all three of the core legacy figures that I have here. A lot of the other figures are repaints of things I already have, so there's not a whole lot more to say. I think Goldbug here is really neat. I like the way he looks, but I already have this same figure 3 times over between Cliffjumper and Bugbite and Hubcap. This figure here I already have in the other version of Silverstreak, and this I basically already have with my Siege Ironhide. So there's not a whole lot here that I, and probably you, haven't seen already. If you liked the original versions of all these figures, you're going to like these new versions. As for the characters that we're seeing for the first time, like these 3 legacy molds, these are probably some of my favorites of what I opened up here today. And it can be kind of a bummer when you spend this much money and you get this many toys. And keep in mind, I'm happy with all of them. I like them all. But when you get that many new toys in a row and you realize, yeah, I don't think any of these are qualifying for my best of list. These are all pretty good, but there's nothing here blowing my mind. That's kind of unfortunate because, I like having my mind blown. But they're all good. if I had to pick my favorite out of this lot, it might well be Kickback. Not so much that it's an awesome figure, although it is a great figure, but also I just really like the Insecticons in general. But I can't imagine he would make my top 10 list this year, just because he was actually my least favorite of the 3 Insecticons. So if they end up releasing Bombshell and Shrapnel later this year, both of them would probably knock Kickback down a peg. Also, the Studio Series Perceptor is really nice. I was worried because my only experience with the Studio Series is that Sharkticon, who I thought was pretty poorly done. And I also have the character Jackpot, who is just a repaint of the Studio Series Jazz. And I didn't think that was that great either. So I was a little worried with the quality of Studio Series, but this guy I actually think looks really good. He feels nice and solid. He does have some empty space there on the back of his head, and this is kind of a weird bit of articulation on his leg. It can't really be helped because he needs it to transform, but it is kind of awkward. But otherwise, I think he looks great, and probably the best mainstream release Perceptor that we've ever gotten. So yeah, my review of this stuff is it's thumbs up across the board. So there you go. Oh, and I guess I also should have mentioned probably at the start of this video, if you're watching this review to find out how the car modes look and how easy they are to transform and all that stuff, I never transform any of my Transformers. I just like the robot modes. So I'm sorry if you sat through nearly an hour of me talking about robots waiting to hear me review the cars, but I'm sure the cars are all great too. But anyway, regardless, I think that's pretty much it. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to like and subscribe to the video. And please leave me some comments. You know, my views are doing okay, and but yeah, not too many people comment on anything. So come on, give me some comments. And I'll be back soon. I've got a couple other videos planned. Like I said, I've got Star Wars Black Series. I've got a ton of Marvel Legends piling up over there. And yeah, there's a couple other things I want to talk about. So stay tuned. I'll be back soon. Thank you very much for watching. Ciao.